And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101, our midweek edition. Welcome everyone done. Yesterday we were off. Um, uh, there were some clashes, um, and I had to attend a very important meeting. But here we are this evening to continue our conversation on what's happening politically in Guyana. And of course, we are part of the Caribbean, we are part of the Western Hemisphere, and so therefore our politics are very much part of the larger family. So, welcome down. If you're joining us from Guyana, welcome. Please share the link as usual. Welcome down to Politics 101. Hello there. If you're joining us from Linden, uh, a special welcome to you. Well, Linden was referred to by Dr. Rodney as the cradle of the revolution, and it remains um, uh, the cradle of our revolution to turn Guyana into the country, the place that we want to tenant. Our dreams of emancipation, our dreams of independence, they continue to loom large as we try to reconcile the differences in our country so that we can together live in harmony, in peace, even if we don't always share the same uh, political and partisan perspectives. So welcome down to us. I notice DC's in the house, Washington DC. I would imagine St. Kitts Nevis is in the house. Tonight we're going to have Kidackie Amsterdam on. I missed this morning our conversation in Bostonian morning time. So we're going to have that conversation tonight. I'm in the chair, so Kidackie will be answering the questions. He, of course, has been on the street over the last week, demonstrating in front of GCOM, drawing attention to the urgency of fixing the electoral architecture so that we can have the kind of credible elections that all stakeholders can be confident in. Good evening, Rhonda. Good evening, Coffee. Denise Booker, my countrywoman. Good evening and welcome down to Politics 101. Please share the link and let everyone know. Welcome. If you're joining us from Chicago, I noticed Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City, joining us here this evening. So Kidackie is going to be on, and we're going to be talking about all things politics. I noticed Kidackie and Sherrod were on the East Bank. They're talking to some workers at Pretty Paul Singh, I think, is the name. A few years ago, I had to make some representation for a couple of workers there to the Minister of Labor. And I noticed those issues are back. So Kidackie will be joining us in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, let me welcome everyone down. I notice my brother, Ernest Elliott of Golden Grove, political stalwart of the village, the East Coast, and the People's National Congress. Welcome, welcome, Ernest, down to Politics 101. Welcome, welcome to Politics 101. You're joining us from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Jamaica. Lots of our people are in the Bahamas. I know that. St. Martin, Antigua and Barbuda. Welcome down to Politics 101. Hello there to Albert Morgan from the Quarantine, one of my favorite areas of the Quarantine, that number 51, 52, 53 Union area. As a little boy, we used to go to Union and dance kwekwe. We had a kwekwe group in Buxton called Utashinda, and we used to frequent that area. Manchester, Alness area, we stayed there. The people from that part of the Quarantine would remember Vesta Lowe. She had a lot to do with penning our national songs, and she had a house there in Manchester, and we would stay there, and we would perform at concerts along the coast, along the Quarantine coast. My brother Mboya worked at Albion Estate at that time. He was WP activist on the Quarantine and a cultural man. We've got to have him on this program here in the not so distant future to talk a little bit about African culture and African retainers in Guyana. And he was our point person there and would invite us to come up to the Quarantine coast. Very beautiful part of Guyana. If you're joining us from the Quarantine coast, welcome. Welcome to Politics 101, keeping the flames of resistance going. Good evening. Good evening. Orin Newton, my good friend from Buxton, we spent a little time together there around August after years. One of the philosophers in our village, you just have to see Orin Newton in action. He has all the characteristic and, as we would say, the antics of the village philosopher. Welcome down to Politics 101. If you're joining us from England, Europe, welcome to Politics 101. I noticed Orin Arthur. The Orins are out tonight. Orin Arthur, one of my good friends from Buxton. We both lived in California eons ago. I think he still lives in between California and Buxton. I see him in Buxton all the time. But we lived in California together. We had a small group of Guyanese there in Southern California, Rancho Cucamonga area. I taught at Claremont Graduate University for 3 years. And so I spent some time there with Buxton as my good friend. Dennis Collison, who was an athlete back in the days, and he's the husband of June Griffith. Many of you remember June Griffith from Buxton, who was a terror of an athlete and made Guyana proud. My generation remembers her in a Pan Am Games. I think it was the American sprinter. And there was that photo finish between June and I think an American sprinter. But they're there in Southern California. Um, uh, Lots of the athletes in that area, Guyanese athletes in that area. But welcome to Politics 101. If you're from Southern California, as my friend Orin Arthur is, um, welcome to Politics 101, the LA area. Really had some good times there. Los Angeles and the environs, it's a different world altogether. As the people who are on the West Coast of the United States will say, New York is a world unto itself. Those of us who do not live in California, California is a world unto itself, especially that LA area. And I know that we have quite a few Guyanese there. Good evening, Desiree. Good evening. How are you? Um, Desiree, of course, is joining us from Maryland, the Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia area. Welcome, welcome to Politics 101. One of our faithful servants, faithful viewers, faithful family member. Welcome. Welcome to you, Marlon. Marlon Thomas from Atlanta, Golden Grove area. Of course, that area has been very much in the news because of the murder of Quindon Bacchus and the good people of Haslington, Golden Grove. And of course, Nabakis is going to say, you know, don't leave me out. So we have to talk about Haslington, Golden Grove, Nabaklis. Welcome. How about the good people of Victoria? Wonderful people of Victoria. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We're here tonight. Sorry about last night. Sometimes, you know, you get pulled in all directions and just couldn't make it here on time for our program last night. And so we took a little break, but we are back tonight. And please share the link, of course. Kidackie is going to be here. We're going to be talking about the issues in the news. I noticed Professor Dwayne Benjamin says he's from Eastville. We would like to think that Eastville is Buxton, and I know he doesn't want to own us. So he says from Eastville. My good friend Dwayne, activist in the village, a member of the 1st of August movement. He is the education secretary of that organization, was quite instrumental in organizing the forum that 1st of August movement had last month. I noticed Dwayne is saying, all right, he's Annandale. Well, Annandale is also Buxton. He's trying to. He teaches at the University of Guyana. It's good to see everyone out tonight and joining the conversation because, you know, they want the conversation to go away. But we have to endeavor to ensure that the conversation never dies. We keep the conversation going because it's part of our mobilization. Want to thank all of you who continue to support these programs, the Buxtonian Morning Time and Politics 101, emanating out of Buxton and the East Coast. And as you know, Kidackie and I are members of the WPA. And hello to brother Mark Benshop, who's going to be on at 9 o'clock tonight. Hello to Sherrod Duncan, the General Secretary of the AFC, whose program follows this program. We're all part of this large family. It's one of the things that we have to get accustomed to doing, that we may have our different partisan membership. Carol is from the AFC. I'm from the WPA. Kidackie is from the WPA. Mark is independent, but I'm sure he has his partisan leanings. But the fact of the matter, we are all in this boat together. And the boat is sinking. Captain, the ship is sinking. And we've got to keep the ship afloat. But we have to keep it afloat in our image also. Because the contention, the major contention in our Guyana today is that Guyana, the power in Guyana is not carved or crafted or constructed in the image of all Guyanese. Welcome on to Politics 101. And I see Patricia A. Bernard, Ines A. Cheryl Wharton, who is also a very loyal member of our extended family. Welcome to Politics 101. My sister, Joy Ann Beckles. Let me pull back. Joy Ann Hooper Beckles, who lives in Dim Bar, as we call it, Barbados. And I remember, I think it might have been 2 years ago, or a year ago, I can't remember. Time flies so much these days. We were at a demonstration in Buxton, and she came to the demonstration and I was passing, and she saw me, and she got out of the car, and Kidackie was there, and she said, I got to get a picture with you all. I've been a loyal viewer and supporter for a long time. And, you know, that kind of loyalty gives you the petrol to keep going on. And Joy Ann is saying it was Anne's Grove village that made the sad news this morning. We have to pray, asking God to eradicate the Apanjat curse and all the blood-sucking spirits of the landscape of Guyana. Well said, well said. All right, let's roll. Let's roll. The drums are beginning to roll, and it means that we're on the move. Let me bring in Brother Kidackie. Kidackie, good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening, viewers.
And
how are you doing?
Let me thank you for all the good work that you continue to do. Of course, some people may think that you are a one-man army running around the place, making trouble, and so forth. But to remind persons that you're an activist, you're a WPA activist, you're a community activist in the tradition of the UC Guyana, who I caught up with this past weekend, and we had, as usual, a marathon chat, and he is always asking about what you're doing. One of the things Guyana taught us is do not limit yourself. Yes, you're a party activist, you're a WPA activist, you belong to a party, but you're also a community activist. You're also a teacher. You're also a cultural activist. And that is why we refer to Guyana as a Renaissance man, as, oh my goodness, a man who is not limited, who is not, because he's 97 years old, still going strong. He had that letter in the newspaper a couple of days ago, drawing our attention to the fact that the government named the commission of inquiry and did not publish it in the Gazette, did not list the terms of reference. And we saw somebody from the commission replying saying, there was reference to the terms of reference. And what Brian is saying is that you have to publish the terms of reference. The sleight of hand. But we are, of course, students of Brother UC, and he has taught us that activism is not narrow. Activism is broad. And so thank you, Kidackie, for your broad activism, and that you're not out there on your own. You're part of a larger collective. Our party releases its members to do work where they live. They don't have to ask the party permission if they see something wrong to act on it. We permit our members in their professional capacity to do work without having to be confined to party discipline. It's a mode of organization that frees up the party member to be more than just a party member, to be a servant of his or her community. So, Kidackie, you were out today, I think it was the 5th day of protests in front of GCOM. How is that going?
Well, yeah, thank you for counting, because actually I have not been counting. So yes, I think it's about day 5. How has it been going? I am getting results. I think I'm getting results. If one were to look at the numbers, they would think, well, hey, all is not well on this protest line. All is not well in Guyana. But as they say, those who are in it, you got to live in it to know where the house leaking and so on. Those who are involved in the protest will tell you that, hey, we are having an impact. We're having an impact. Every day is a different experience. And every day you get a little bit more encouragement because of what happens. So in my mind, it's going good. It can be better. There's no doubt it can be better, because the average person looking at a protest will look at the number to determine whether or not they should join, whether or not they think it is making sense, right? For those of us who have been in activism from since Noah was a boy, we know that these things don't just happen overnight, number one. And number two, we also know, like I was saying this morning, small acts does cut big tree. And so the numbers might appear small, but they're very effective. Sometimes you have a whole large group of people.
Numbers. I don't want you to stress too much on the numbers. The numbers game is for other people. You and those people there are in front of GCOM, because GCOM has become ground zero for the PPP's plot to dominate Guyana. Speak to that for me.
Well, yes, certainly. From the time the PPP were installed, GCOM became their targets. As many will remember, there's still GCOM administrative staffers were before the courts, charged incorrectly so, and they have not had their day in courts on the courts yet. Those charges were intended to get rid of them from GCOM. There are a lot of people who were hounded out of GCOM so that they could have been replaced with people who are favorable to the PPP's agenda. We have seen a lot of those replacements. We know of the hiring of the chief elections officer. We know of the chaos, if I can call it that took place there. A Jamaican of Afro descent was the highest scoring candidate, and yet he did not get the job. Instead, they chose a local PPP boy. So all of
why would the PPP want to control GCOM? What is the
well, yes, I'm getting there. They say history is a great teacher.
Is GCOM
they say history is a great teacher. I must remind people of the shenanigans that have been taking place at GCOM from the time the PPP came to office. But in short, if you want me to give you the short answer, why would the PPP
give me a thoughtful answer?
why would the PPP want to control GCOM? GCOM is where an election, quite frankly, can be won or lost. It starts with the voters list. We argue that the most important prerequisite for a free, fair, and credible election is the voters list. Because if you have a party list, there are hundreds or thousands of opportunities there for imposter voting and so on. What one does not also know is that once the PPP controls the apparatus at GCOM, as happened in the past, the information technology department, or the computer room as they call it, where formula is used to tabulate votes and seats and so on, those formula can be tampered with. They can be set in such a way that they can be stealing votes from one contesting party and giving it to the other. We have had that experience. I always refer to the Dipu brothers, I think they were from Trinidad, who were brought in as IT specialists. And it was found that they were tampering with the system in such a way. So they can also control that. They can the list, a bloated list gives opportunities. The control of the ITD department gives opportunities. As a matter of fact, it is alleged that one of the persons we hired at GCOM, I think his name is oh boy, but he worked in the IT department. They say in the last elections he collected the server from Ashmin's building and went away.
You know of that instance. His name
right.
is not
and one must ask, why did he go away with this server? Obviously,
he only brought the server back when the present Home Affairs Minister, who was then a member of GCOM, we're talking here about Robeson Ben, when
yes.
Robeson Ben asked him to bring back the server.
By then, the damage might have been done already, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But, and to think that he is one of the only officials from that period, if I can call it that has been supported for rehiring by the PPP. That tells the story in itself.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things here. When I started out in politics, you rigged by having people vote multiple times. That was the thing. You didn't count the votes in the place of polling. That was the method of rigging. Over time, when the PPP came to office in 1992, we noticed the rigging shifted to the actual GCOM itself. The manipulation there at GCOM. And I think it's instructive, and I want you to comment on this, that former Minister Clement Rohi, who replaced Bibi Shadiq on the commission, one of his first pronouncements was that GCOM should reflect reflect Guyana. On the surface, it sounds like a normal statement. The police force should reflect Guyana. The public service should reflect Guyana. So why not? GCOM should reflect Guyana. What is hidden behind that seemingly rational, fair statement?
Well, you have to look at we have to look at the context here. I would say, because the PPP argues that the majority of the citizenry of Guyana are East Indians, and so if GCOM should reflect Guyana to start with, the majority of the staffers are expected to be East Indians. The majority of the staffers, quite frankly, in this country, are pro-PPP. If you look at GCOM, I talk about removal of those officials. The majority of them have been replaced by East Indians pro-PPP. So when Roy says GCOM should reflect Guyana, he's simply saying that, listen, we should dominate GCOM because that is what they're about. We should dominate GCOM.
He's less interested in the makeup of GCOM. He's more interested in the partisan makeup of GCOM. Yes? No.
Of course, yes. Because at the end of the day, like I just pointed out, right? to reflect Guyana in GCOM, if you use that as your cover, then nobody can argue with proliferation of East Indian Guyanese in critical positions in GCOM. And those East Indian Guyanese are most likely be favorable to the PPP, and so the PPP will have their biddings, right? Again, look at the hiring pattern, you will see it. And like I just pointed out, the chief elections officer issue, right? They went for an East Indian Guyanese who is a known PPP supporter.
Yes, and I think one has to be very careful as one articulates what is happening, because, like I said, they're less interested if they can find an African Guyanese who's going to do their bidding at GCOM. That's what they're interested in. So in this case, in this instance, ethnicity and ethnic balance is used as a cover for political domination or partisan domination. We had the instance there at GCOM where they reopened, Brother Kidackie, they reopened the search for a deputy CEO. And the commission is split on the person that has emerged as the selectee. Speak to that, please.
Again, they say hindsight is 2020 vision, and history is a great teacher. When they were looking for a CEO, remember they actually extended the application period because the people that they wanted to apply, quite frankly, didn't apply in the first instance. If you remember that when they shortlisted the group to be vetted for the CEO position, the Jamaican was the person leading, and they extended the period, and it is during that extended period the current CEO, what's his name, Vishnu something, Vishnu Prasad perhaps, applied and was eventually selected. Now, in the instance of the search for a DCEO, based on my understanding is, when they had the application process, they shortlisted the PPP representatives, and the chair sided with them by arguing that the shortlisted folks did not necessarily meet the requirement. And so they agreed to re-advertise that vacancy. And in re-advertising that vacancy, I think there was one other applicant. And this is a retiree from GCOM, right? A retiree from GCOM who applied. And I don't know if you call it happenstance, but that is the person who was eventually selected as DCO. So it says that the PPP again is using its commissioners and the backing of the current chair, Claudette Singh, to dominate in the hiring of officials at the commission there. And they're doing that because they're looking for people who will execute their agenda.
Aki, welcome again to Politics 101. In case you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Kidackie Amsterdam, WPA activist, and the host of a Bostonian Morning Time. We're talking about GCOM, the elections commission. As you know, Kidackie is leading a picketing exercise 3 times per week in front of GCOM. He has the support of the WPA in that exercise, and you're invited to join the picketing exercise. You may not get there for an entire hour. You can drop by for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and show your solidarity. I know many of you have been showing your solidarity in other ways. And we want to thank you for supporting the cause. We have to do something. C.L.R. James, the philosopher king of the Caribbean, always said, there is something to be done. There is always something to be done. There is always something to be done. Kidackie, let me draw you out here. Your party, the WPA, at the public meeting of the joint opposition parties in Golden Grove, said that you favor, your party feels that the gauntlet that was thrown down by the opposition, that it would not contest an election with the present voters list, should not be confined just to general elections. It should also include local government election. There was some, I think, hesitancy on that issue by the other parties, the other major parties in the opposition. Give our audience the thinking behind the WPA's position to say, if you are not going to go to an election with that list, it should be all elections and not just national elections.
Well, of course, the WPA position is simple, and I don't know. I will always.
What's the thinking behind the decision? Because it's not as simple. If it were simple,
that's why I'm saying I will always make historical references, because the WPS position is, if you're saying you will not go to any election, you will not go to election with a list, it can't be one election as against the other. Local government elections are due before general and regional elections, or national and regional elections. And if you choose to go to the local government elections with the list, then the argument basically that will come from the PPP and everybody else is that the list is acceptable. And if it's an acceptable list, then you really have no argument of not going to a national elections with it. And if you go to the local government elections with it, as Takuma rightly said, you're going to get your head chopped off, because the system is already rigged. The list is bloated. And I refer to history because the 2020 elections, and I continuously refer to the 2020 elections, local government elections, is where the PPP tested its rigging machinery, right? Using the bloated list and whatever else apparatus they use. And they got through because they won the majority of the local, the neighborhood democratic councils. And everybody just brushed it aside and say, there's not nothing. It's not an indication of what can happen at the national elections, because Guyanese generally don't pay attention to local government elections, especially when their people are in government. And so everybody brushed it off as that. But the reality is, the PPP used local government elections to test their rigging machinery. Coming this time around, they are going to use the same local government elections to test their rigging machinery. And the argument will remain, if you went to local government elections with a list, then the list is acceptable. It is good enough, and there's no need to change the list, right? WPA is of the opinion, listen, elections are elections. Regardless of what elections we're talking about, the list must be cleaned, because it is only a clean list that can guarantee you some semblance of a free, fair, and credible election.
And we have here, Colin makes a statement here that I've put on the screen. And I put that statement on the screen because I think it's a very important statement. It speaks to something that we do not like to talk about. And that is, we have two major ethnic groups in Guyana that are at each other's throat as it relates to power, political power. If you win an election, you win all the formal political power. And as we have seen with the people of Kidackie, it is prepared to use up all of that formal political space that comes with winning an election. And we have heard Dr. Henry Jeffrey, who was part of the PPP, said that from around 2006 or thereabout, the PPP realized that it could no longer rely on its ethnic support to win an election. And so, therefore, it put in high gear the notion of rigging. And so, in these societies where two groups are almost equal size, and each group relies on its base of supporters to get into power, it means, therefore, that rigging comes into play. Rigging then becomes part of the route to power. In such a situation, Mr. Amsterdam, can you put in place an electoral machinery that neither side could manipulate? Is it impossible to have a neutral machinery? Or do we have to live with rigging of elections for the rest of the life of our nation? Brother Kidackie, you with me? You with me? I notice your hand moving.
Yes, I am with you. Yes, I am with you. Yes. We don't have to, I can multitask. We don't have to live with rigged elections. I am firm on that. Listen, times have changed. Technology has changed. Right? And just as how we can argue for the cleaning of lists as a prerequisite, we can argue for biometrics, and we can use that. There also, and you're in the great US, as they say. If you voted in an elections in the US, you will most likely have used the voting machinery. Right? Machine, as they say, a voting machine, a computer to register your vote. So what we can do to eliminate the possibilities or reduce the possibilities of elections being rigged is to embrace technology. Embrace technology and remove a lot of the human interferences into the process. The system is there, it's legislated for, and you have the necessary quality control, and we can get rid of rigged elections in this country. We are in a period of time when the country is flush with money. We have money, and so we can invest in these things. But it is the political will. Like everybody is saying, the PPP cannot necessarily rely now on its numerical supremacy, if I can call it that, bigger numbers among its ethnic supporters. Likewise, the PNC might not be able to do that. And so both sides might be interested in a way of cheating the system. But if citizens really stand up and demand fairness, then we can put in place a system that will allow for fair and credible elections. You clean the list, it is only those people who go, just now, it is only those people who are on the list that can turn up at the polling stations. As a second level of check, you have the biometrics. No two persons will ever have the same fingerprint, for example. And so you reduce by great proportions the possibility of rigging taking place there.
All right, you reduce it.
You have the necessary control systems in the ITD, Information and Technology Department, then it is less likely that somebody will be able to tamper with the system.
Dr. Amsterdam here, and I'm trying to draw him out because the first part of our discussion was that the PPP is controlling the machinery of GCOM by putting its personnel in key position. And the logical question, therefore, is even with your improved technology, if you have people there who are partisan, they are going to manipulate your technology. And I'm trying to get Kidackie Amsterdam here to sharpen this argument so that the opposition doesn't fall on its own sword. You call for the technology, you get the technology, but the people who controlling GCOM are PPP people, and then you end up saying, oh, well, the technology and we still get thief. And shouldn't we be talking about the architecture?
It is why I talk about the control systems, right? It is why I talk about quality control. Because yes, we know that we have people who in the system who will attempt to manipulate it. But we have to ensure that that system caters for people who will overlook it. Take, for example, when the election that was almost stolen by Gokul Bulu and handed to the PPP. It is because people were paying attention to what was happening when Vincent Alexander was either alerted or observed that a formula was being misused to hand the election to the PPP. That's the kind of quality control. You have to have, and you have to negotiate, and you have to hold firm on having certain systems in place that will prevent the kind of interference. It's the same quality control that was in place, if I can argue that recognized when the Deepu brothers were making attempts to corrupt the computer system, right? So yes, we know, and because we know that there are people in the system who will want to do the PPP's biddings, and they are partisan and they will want to corrupt for the benefit of the PPP. We have to ensure that we too have people in the system who will be the vanguard, will be like eagles to watch over and be dedicated to watching over to ensure that the system functions as it is intended.
Actually, Amsterdam, let me ask you this question. Because younger activists, you all have to grapple with some of these questions. What's the role of the opposition in contemporary Guyana in 2020? What's the role of the opposition?
The role of the opposition has changed, quite frankly. Traditionally, people argue the opposition is to, or it's expected to oppose everything that government does. In my mind, the role of the opposition in contemporary Guyana is to function as an alternative to the government. And when I say function as an alternative to the government, not only to criticize what the government does, but offer solutions or alternatives to what the government does, and be prepared to lead to either have those alternatives implemented or to get the government to change course. I think that's the role of the opposition in contemporary Ghana. Currently, listen, in the past, it was okay to stand in parliament and argue and say, well, this is the way you expect things to go. That is, the budget is not fair and all of that. But when you have a government like this one that we have, with a 1 or 2 seat majority, flush with money that it is willing to throw left, right, and center, to corrupt everybody, to have their way, the opposition has to change its strategy. It is not well enough that you stay in parliament and you argue. The politics has to move out of the walls of parliament and go right into the communities, as I would like to say, into the gutters, so that people become more educated, people become more aware, people become more attuned to your agenda.
Then what, Mr. Amsterdam? You go into the community, you leave parliament, as you're saying. I don't know how you do that. But you go into the community, you educate people, you get them attuned to do what?
To demand the changes that are required for the society. And when I say you leave parliament, one of the problems I think we have in this society is that we see things as exclusive. You're either in parliament or in the communities. You can do both.
Fair enough.
You're either in parliament, towing the line, or making the country ungovernable. You can do both.
You introduced a new element there, making the country ungovernable. You didn't say that in your first answer. In your first answer, you say the opposition must function as an alternative. So you were saying that part of the role of the opposition is to make the country ungovernable. Is not making the country ungovernable and unpatriotic. Are you not setting yourself up for charges of sabotage of the country? How do you justify the opposition making the country ungovernable?
My justification for the opposition making the country ungovernable is simple. The opposition represents almost 50% of the people of this country. And if they can't have a say, or they can't be respected, the ideas and opinions can be respected in the National Assembly, where it is expected that common sense and respect for people's representatives will take place, then you have to take to the streets. You have to find other ways and means of making those who sit in the office of power, if I can call it that, listen to the representatives of the people. And there's nothing unpatriotic about making a country ungovernable. It is the role of the people's representatives to represent them. And so if representing them means that you have to obstruct the status quo, upturn the table, kick out the legs, whatever you want to call it, then so be it. The great US Trump believed that he had a constituency to represent. And he created an uprising on Capitol Hill. That was not patriotic.
I would not want to stimulate Mr. Trump, but I do agree that when all normal democratic doors are closed to making change in a society, people have to find creative ways. I wouldn't want, and I want to repeat, I wouldn't want the Trump formula in Guyana. I think it's counterproductive that the opposition should not aim at destroying Guyana. When all doors are closed to normal, democratic, and peaceful change, when the government closes the parliament, does not take into consideration the pleas of the opposition amendments, then the opposition is justified in moving outside. When the government goes into communities and bypasses the elected local officials in the NDC and the RDC, then it closes the door to peaceful and normal political engagement. And I think it is at that point the society, the opposition, has to look for alternative ways and means of influencing decision making. I don't think the opposition in 2022 should be confined to the old roles of the opposition. I think in 2022, the opposition must be part of decision making, not just part of bringing pressure on the government. It is when you are shut out of decision making, it is then that you seek other ways of bringing pressure to bear on the government. Just wanted to put my 2 cents in there and to disassociate our program from the Trump formula. I think Trump was trying to do something that's been Guyana in the opposition and not trying to do. You were out with Sherrod with some workers who have some problems with, is it Pretty Paul Singh? Tell us about that.
Well, yes, I'll tell you about that. But I was also out with Sherrod. We ended up on East Bank Day because we were not only out with at Pretty Pausing. As a matter of fact, Pretty Pausing came after, right? Because we were at Peters Hall, right? Peters Hall, and I think the other community is Providence, where that the sluice door broke several weeks ago and the people were flooded out. Up until now, they have not received any kind of financial assistance from this government. As a matter of fact, one lady who spoke with us alleges that instead of financial assistance, they got brutality. She alleges that Harry Gill, an elderly woman, assaulted her, right? Physically assaulted her. They complain of all of their electronic equipment and furnishings and so on being damaged because of the water, the flood which affected them. They got up and reached their stuff floating and so on. And the authorities, all they offer them is bleach and a little soap powder and J's fluid and so on to clean the yard, not even enough. But so we were there to highlight that problem because the sluice gate is not yet fixed. And the pump, which is supposed to be pumping for 8 hours, they're complaining that it doesn't do 8 hours of pumping. So the water is constantly high in the canal and nipping, as I might say, on the borders of the property. So the lands remain what's soaked, and that is affecting them. That is why we were in East Bank. But when we wrapped up that, we got a call that something was going at Pretty Pausing and they wanted the media. We went down there, and let me take time to say that this country is in a sick state because the mainstream media, right? In Peters Hall, the people complained that they called 65 and they called Gord Mosley and they called, I think, Sigo Bin, and they were treated like less than people. 65 did a hatchet job on their complaints. Mosley perhaps never listened or turned up, and Sigo Bin hung up the phone on them, right? That is what they complained of. Lo and behold, when we turned up at Pretty Pausing, the folks there said that they reached out to some media houses too, and they never turned up to hear their complaints. What are their complaints? Inhumane treatment at Pretty Pausing, unsafe working conditions at Pretty Pausing, bullyism at Pretty Pausing, breach of the Labor Act at Pretty Pausing. They allege that Pretty Pausing does them a lot of wrong and gets away with it because, according to them, he has bought out the entire labor department. They are working under conditions that are unsafe, exposed wires, electrical wires, in storerooms and so on, constant escaping gas. I think it's ammonia or some kind of gas they use. It's constantly escaping, and they have to work in those conditions. They're working Sunday to Sunday, and they're not paid for weekends, they allege. They also allege that they have to cover 10 hours to make a day pay. Where other people are doing 8, they're doing 10 hours to make a day pay with half-hour lunch hour. These are folks who have 20 and 23 and 19 and 18 years of service with Pretty Pausing. As they argue, they built the company. And now they're overlooked for Venezuelans, as the workers call them, Spanish. They allege there are about 40 Spanish-speaking persons working at Pretty Pausing. They allege that many of them do not have ID cards, and so they're questioning whether or not they have work permits, and they're asking the Ministry of Labor to look into that situation. In recognition of the ill treatment that they're getting, the workers decided that they want to be unionized. And in an effort to become unionized, they must have gotten membership forms and so on and started filling them out. And that got to the hearing of Pretty Pausing, the proprietor. He called them at a meeting yesterday, and to say the least, he cussed them out and told them if they want union, let them go on the other side of the gate. In other words, don't come back and work here. I have no place for you. When the workers turned up this morning, 5 of them were locked out. 5 of them were locked out, so they were temporarily, technically dismissed. And their colleagues decided to stand with them because they all are experiencing the same bad treatment. And they say, well, listen, if you're going to dismiss these 5, dismiss all of us, pay us our severance, and let us go. They were sent to the Human Resource Department to talk about their severances, and some of them are being told that they should go back next week and all the kind of stuff, and they're saying they want it now. They want it now. So that is what is happening over at Pretty Paul Singh. People are being treated inhumanely. There are lots of breaches that are being allegedly taking place at the place of business. As a matter of fact, one of the claims is that the company was sold, and the workers are unaware of whom it was sold to, but they're just told that when they move from that location, they're going to some other location, and if they can't get it right here, they know they're gonna get it right there. So it appears as though the company was ownership was changed, but the workers are none the wiser.
Another area of oppression in our country, the oppression of labor. And of course, labor is tied up to politics. The government has made the private sector an important player in our politics. The private sector was very much, or sections of the private sector, was very much part of the coming to power, the installation of the government. And so therefore, in the conflict between labor and the private sector, it seems that the government, which is talking about one Guyana, is taking the side of the private sector, big business, by its very silence. Here are workers, instead of the Ministry of Labor going to their assistance as they are supposed to do, the workers have to call in other forces to go and demonstrate their case. It's another aspect of the struggle in Guyana against domination. And it is a struggle of labor over capital. It's a struggle of labor against capital, not over capital, against capital. And the government, which is, in a sense, the umpire in that conflict, by its very silence, is taking the side of big capital. It's another bell that we have to ring, because the struggle is part racial or largely racial, but underneath the racial struggle is the class struggle, the struggle of labor for survival. Brother Kidackie, from what you all observed, what is the ethnic makeup of most of the workers at Pretty Paul Singh?
You didn't have to look too hard. The majority of workers there are African Guyanese.
And so, yes, therefore, the linkage between race and class. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yes, that linkage certainly exists there. One can't imagine, as somebody likes to say, I can't make up this thing, that workers are calling on the Department of Labor to lodge complaints. And the labor officers are, as soon as they hear Pretty Paul Singh, they're hanging up phones on them. Hanging up phones on them. That shows that, as we like to say, the political connection goes very high up. Because nobody wants to deal with Pretty Paul Singh and these infringements, these alleged infringements. And so, yes, the majority are African Guyanese. A lot of single parent women are there. There are lots of women who said that their families became broken because of the hours that they are required to work, the late nights that they get home. Husbands walk out on them. Partners walk out on them. and this continuous mistreatment at the hands of Pretty Parsing. They say there's not a day that goes by that he treats them like human beings. In their words, they're like dogs.
Our Guyana, our Guyana, our Guyana, in which apartheid, racial apartheid, class apartheid. I noticed somebody said education apartheid in Guyana. Um, it is why the struggle has to be a multifaceted struggle. And it is good to see the AFC and the WPA in the persons of Sarah Duncan and Kidackie Amsterdam going into the communities and highlighting the problems, highlighting the issues. You know, the government has reacted so many times to pressure coming from advocacy on the part of these programs. Sheridan and Kidackie have added another dimension to our advocacy. It's not just here on the program, but taking the microphones of these programs into the communities, highlighting people's problems. It's a tradition that was made popular by Mr. Sharma, who's no longer active. And I think you all have taken it to another level here. In the old days, Sharma had to go into the community tape and then carry it back to the television station to play. Now you have, and that's when I asked the question about the role of the opposition in 2020. That I mean part of the role of the opposition is to do exactly this, is to really go there and expose. You have to make a case. People often say, well, where are the people to come onto the streets? Have we in the opposition made our case as to why people must make that extreme sacrifice to come onto the streets? We have to constantly make our case in the opposition. We have to do that you all did there. And as we think about politics and we articulate our politics, we should see the various roles that the parties are playing. You know, some people belong to big parties usually ask, what the AFC bring to the table? What did WPA bring to the table? So you just have to look at Sherrod and Kidackie today, and you see what small parties can bring to the table. In the sense of not leaving everything to one party, not leaving everything to the PNC, but other parties going out there and playing a role. It's the kind of coalition politics that the opposition has to practice. I think you, the supporters, have to empower the quote-unquote smaller parties who are doing big work. I don't think you can call them small parties anymore. They're doing big work. And I want our audience to recognize that work. It's political work. It's opposition work. And because of the enormity of our challenges, because of the recklessness and the willingness of this government to use absolute power, the opposition has to be equally absolute. And so I just wanted to make a pitch here tonight for the AFC and the WPA to say that reliance on one party, reliance on one entry level, reliance on one issue is the enemy of our struggle. This struggle has to be engaged at every level, and we have to empower our actors, our political actors, and to recognize that our lift is heavy, but it will become lighter the more hands and hearts that we have. Kidackie, you're going out tomorrow again in front of GCOM, keeping the focus on GCOM as an important aspect of the PPP's dominance. What's your message? What have you learned from being out there these last 2 weeks?
Well, let me start with my message. My message is simple. We cannot wait until the 11th hour to demand that the list be cleaned and systems be put in place to ensure that citizens get a free, fair, and credible elections. That's my message. Added to that, GCOM has a constitutional responsibility to clean the list. That's all I'm asking. That's all I am saying. That's all I'm highlighting. What I've learned is that even in the system, there are people who are not happy with what is happening at GCOM. And there are lots of people who would like to see the voters list cleaned. But to a large extent, fear keeps them from coming out and being vocal about it. Fear keeps them from coming out and being vocal about it. Perhaps the society is not at that place yet, where people are willing to confront their fears and demand what is good and just for each and every one. You will hear whispers, all of them must go. The list must be cleared. But you're not seeing the requisite action. People are not prepared to put their identity to their mutterings. But all in all, I think that we're having an impact in front of GCOM. Like I keep pointing out, I was saying to someone this morning who said that nothing is happening, that a lot has been happening. It is not easy, or it's not even normal for the police to come out every day, at least for 3 days of the week, to cordon off an entire block to prevent us from getting in front of GCOM. Yesterday, we basically had the upper hand. We got in front of GCOM before they put up the barriers. So we were directly in front of GCOM. Persons were leaving their offices to come to the front of the compound of GCOM to find out what was happening, because we were in front of GCOM and the message was more direct. The chief elections officer and the chairman of GCOM broke with tradition. They had to go through the back gate instead of coming through the front. So things are happening. We are having an impact. People are stopping as they pass by. What is the protest about? Right? What is the protest about? People are asking those things. And so we're having an impact. As a matter of fact, today when I went there, because of what we did yesterday, they didn't wait for us to turn up to put the barriers in place. They put them in place anticipating that we were going to be there. And you know what they did? They extended the area of barricade. They extended the area of barricade. Like I said to one of the folks out there, as far as I'm concerned, if we continue like this, the barricades will reach to the corner of High and Lamar Street. And we're having an impact. As you like to say, we're winning.
Amsterdam, executive member of the Working People's Alliance, WPA. and host of the popular Bostonian Morning Time, here with us on Politics 101 tonight, reflecting on the politics of the day against the backdrop of the demonstration in front of GCOM. Tomorrow night, I am going to have Mr. Aubrey Rettemeyer, who was here a couple of weeks ago to talk about SARA and corruption and making public some of the things SARA was able to unearth, because the PPP's propaganda is that SARA found nothing. SARA was a waste of time. And Brother Aubrey Rettemeyer, who was the CEO there at SARA, I was here a couple of weeks ago, but he came on late and so couldn't finish. So tomorrow night, he's back. He's going to be back, and we're going to complete that discussion about SARA, answering the question whether SARA was a waste of time or indeed SARA was able to make some inroads as far as official corruption is concerned and retrieving assets that were stolen from the state. So join us tomorrow evening for a conversation with Mr. Aubrey Rettemeyer, the former CEO of SARA. Hope to see all of you there. Brother Kidackie, thank you so much for all you have been doing, and to know that in struggle, every little bit of advocacy and protest becomes, in the final analysis, part of the bigger picture. Good night. And to you, oh beautiful audience, as I am one to say, I love you. I love you all, because that love between those of us who aspire to use our voices on your behalf, that linkage between you and those of us who sit in these seats, has to be grounded in love. Love, not transactional, but love. Love. So until tomorrow night, I want to thank you all again. Good night.